Hello, my name is Faith DiCarlo, and my presentation is on climate change and how it affects pregnancy in the United States and in Chad. I would like to start with a quote from the World Health Organization that states, 2023 was the warmest year on record in over 170 years, and there were multiple climate emergencies from wildfires to cyclones, flooding, and extreme heat. I think this is an important quote considering we don't truly understand the magnitude of climate change on Earth right now and how it truly is affecting the health of every human being. To fully understand how climate change affects pregnancy, we need to fully explore the aspects of climate change that affect pregnancy. To start, we have extreme heat, which leads to premature birth, which is the leading cause of death in childhood. And as 1 degree Celsius increases, the infant mortality rate increases 22.4%. This also leads to hypertension and gestational diabetes in pregnancy. Next, we have air pollution. Air pollution increases high blood pressure in mothers and can lead to preeclampsia, eclampsia, stroke, and the need for labor induction. It also lowers your birth weight, it increases preterm birth, and the impact on fetal brain and lung development is increased when in a place with high air pollution. Lastly, we have our natural disasters. Flooding and drought take supplies and water away from pregnant women who need these supplies. Wildfires increase respiratory disorders in all people, including pregnant women. And to end, I want to say a quote from Anita Porter, who is a World Health Organization scientist, that states, "A healthy environment underpins health throughout life, enabling healthy growth and development in childhood and adolescence, healthy pregnancies, and healthy aging." To first explore the climate change in the United States and how it affects pregnancy, we have to understand how climate change affects the United States. To first understand, we need to look at the fact that climate change is slowly increasing in the United States and is the second largest country to release emissions, second to China, of the world. This is including all of our greenhouse gases and all of our air pollution, as we talked about in the last slide. As average temperature increases in America, the amount of dehydration and kidney failure increases in pregnant women. This is a huge risk for many pregnant women in America, considering this is happening everywhere in America. The last important thing to understand about America and how climate change is affecting it, that women in America in communities of color, low income, and certain immigrants may face a higher pregnancy risk due to climate change. This is due to the less access and care and higher chronic illness rates in these places. Chronic illness rates in many low income and communities of color and communities with immigrants are very high in America. And if you combine that with climate change, as well as being in places that have high pollution or high average temperatures, it is incredibly unsafe for those who are pregnant. Many that live in places in America with higher air pollution put them at a huge risk, as we will see on the next slide, of the different states in America that produce the highest emissions. Lastly, we talk about the wildfire smoke, that how it could affect certain places like California, how it could affect certain places north, like North Dakota, down all the way over east to New York, that have to deal with the wildfires that come from Canada. This could risk dental development and risk low birth weight and premature birth in pregnant women. This graphic shows us the different states and how they are affected by air pollution. For example, Texas produces the most air pollution through greenhouse gases, putting their women at higher risk. And that includes electricity, heat, transportation industry, and many other little things that are within Texas that makes it produce the high air emissions that it does. Then we can look at California, which transportation is the reason that it produces the most greenhouse gases. And then we go to Florida and Illinois and Pennsylvania, which is where I am from. And it's really important to look at this graphic and understand that the US, since we are so developed, produce many gases to the atmosphere, which are very negative and can affect our women so greatly. Next, we want to look at the climate change in Chad. Chad is ranked number 2 in impact of climate change across the world. In 2022, more than 1 million people in Chad were displaced by floods due to climate change. Chad, unfortunately, is a country that is in Africa and along the equator that is more affected by natural disasters than many other countries. And this affects a pregnant woman's access to important nutrients that she needs to keep her and her baby healthy. The Republic of Chad also ranges from very hot to subtropical temperatures, with 3 basins, a long river, and another very long river. This makes the temperatures much higher due to the more water in the country. This landlocked country is among the hottest and driest in the world and has experienced persistent drought for many decades. And this has unfortunately led to famine and led to all these high temperatures, unfortunately, killing its people, which also includes pregnant women who are taken care of 2 within 1. Rural locations of Chad are the most affected by this because they have the least access to help during these natural disasters, and that is where most of the population is. So while these natural disasters happen, most of the population has less access to healthcare due to simply being too far away and from the fact that their country already has less access to healthcare. Lastly, coverage for reproductive, maternal, newborn, and child health in Chad is very low compared to other countries. Chad has the second highest maternal mortality rate in the world, with 1,140 deaths for every 100,000 live births. Child mortality rates in Chad are 113.8 deaths per 1,000 live births, which is incredibly high, especially compared to America and other more developed countries. It unfortunately is not high considering the countries that surround it that have a similar statistic to this, but Chad is the most affected due to its geography because of how climate change affects a country with this much water and effect of temperature. To move back to talking about the United States, I think it's important to talk about the culture and how it affects these pregnant women and climate change. First, we must understand that the United States is a melting pot with many different cultures of people. Women in the United States have many different religions and many different cultures. Past research suggests that religious women are less likely to use contraception or less effective contraceptive methods. This leads to less abortion and could lead to more women dying due to pregnancy complications induced by climate change. This is really, really important to look at, especially in lower income places that have less access to healthcare in America and who are more affected by climate change, which we just talked about, the different states that need to be more aware of it. Something that also is incredibly important to talk about, which is not as talked about in many other countries in the world, is racial bias. In the United States, women of Black ethnicity are significantly more likely to die from cardiomyopathy, pulmonary embolism, and hypertensive disorders during pregnancy compared to a woman of white ethnicity. This is a scientific fact, and it is difficult for these women who are affected by these unfortunate things to get the help they need due to the racial bias in America. The underlying bias and racism in America can allow many Black women to be refused of certain medical care. Evidence from the USA suggests that there are differences in cause of maternal death depending upon ethnicity, which is incredibly heartbreaking to understand. Black women in locations like Texas, California, and many states demonstrated in the past graphic are most affected by this and need to be the most aware of the unfortunate bias that is present in America. Now it's most important to look into Chad's culture and how it affects pregnancy. Chad has one main ethnic group, unlike America. The majority of Chad's population is some branch of African, whereas America has many different cultures and many different ethnic groups. It is important to understand religion and how it is different than America, whereas in Chad, Chad's population is mainly a part of the Islamic religion. And this is different than America because the biggest, most widespread religion in America is Catholicism. When talking about abortion and how it affects pregnancy in the Islamic culture, it allows abortion in the first 4 months due to fetal abnormalities. This is incredibly important to note because in America, this is not true in certain places. Whereas in Chad, you are able to get an abortion culturally, and it is acceptable in the first 4 months. Whereas in the most popular religion in America, it is Catholicism, abortion is frowned upon in any capacity. This is helpful for Chad, but also unfortunate considering America has more access to abortion healthcare, whereas Chad has less access to healthcare in general. This could be because there are more. The reason that Chad is able to have abortions could be because there are more abnormal fetuses due to their extreme climate. Lastly, due to it being a more underdeveloped country, access to medical care is less, and because of their location and their availability. High child mortality rate appears to be partially driven by low rates of vaccination and exclusive breastfeeding, high rates of malnutrition, as well as poor access to safe sanitation and hygiene. This access to safe water is incredibly important to talk about, considering they have access to much more water considering their geography. But access to clean water is the most important thing. On top of all of this, climate change increases the risk for women in Chad, while they also have more increased pregnancy risks. So all put together, Chad are one of the most important group of women to look into to understand how climate change and pregnancy come together to affect their women. When looking at prevention in the USA for climate change to help our women, it is important to understand this quote from the United States Department of State that was stated in 2024. The United States is scaling up action at home and abroad to put the world on a path to reach net zero emissions economy-wide by 2050 and achieve the global goal on adaptation. When they're talking about this, they are specifically talking about the U.S. Center, which holds events about climate change in the U.S. in many different countries. Focusing on mostly pollution, considering how many greenhouse gases are in the USA releases, is incredibly important to cut overall U.S. greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030 relative to the 2005 levels is what our government wants to do. It also wants to cut down 50% electric vehicle sales share by 2030 and 100% carbon pollution-free electricity by 2035. They have these plans, but as of right now, since this was stated in earlier of 2024, we are still not on track for that. But it is important that we are using our money to try and top over climate change. This year, more money, 1.7 trillion worldwide, will be invested into clean energy technologies like wind, solar, EVs, and batteries than invested into fossil fuels, which is an incredibly important statistic to understand, considering fossil fuels are a main reason that climate change exists. Now, it is important to talk about prevention in Chad. This is incredibly important to talk about considering Chad is unfortunately unable to help itself as much as other countries like America. First, we must talk about their national adaptation plan and their projected outcomes of this plan. They want to have an integrated information system, including a reliable database of climate and socioeconomic data of Chad. This is important to understand how Chad is being affected and what we can do next to understand what we can do for Chad. That information can support the adaptation in the policy and decision-making process in a more underdeveloped country like Chad, and will help other countries, such as Chad, deal with climate change. Unfortunately, Chad has to reach out and understand other countries, and understand what they do, and have those countries help them considering their extreme climate. Institutional capacities are strengthening in key regions of Chad to facilitate climate change adaptation. And plans and ideas into budgeting on what to do for Chad. Which leads me into my next point, which is talking about the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine in Britain that went to Chad and did work there to increase availability of medical care and medical professionals. The outcomes of that project were that there was a general improvement of the availability to integrated healthcare in Chad, with strengthening capacity of 18 doctors and 288 health providers, as well as equipment and hygiene products to 61 new healthcare facilities. This is incredibly important, considering the more access those Chad mothers have, the better their pregnancies can be while living in a place with such an extreme climate. Another thing that the project did was the introduction of quality of care culture based on custom-made quality improvement standards that were developed with the healthcare providers that were placed in Chad. This comes with monthly monitoring and evaluation follow-up on the availability and quality of care, which leads to the Chadian maternal and child health policy making. Lastly, I think it's important to have a summary to talk about the difference between the United States and Chad and how climate change affects pregnancy there, and what to do in the future. The United States and Chad are very different spots in terms of development, so their climate change problems and how they affect pregnancy are somewhat different. If we first talk about America, pollution is one of the main effects on pregnancy in America. This is due to having more cities than Chad and having more cars that produce greenhouse gases. America is focusing more on pollution and their emission rates because pollution will affect their people more than access to healthcare or natural disasters. America is also working towards a racial bias and in all aspects, not just in maternal health. Though racism will always exist, these women in low-income cities and being most affected by climate change deserve better. While doing my own research, I have seen that there is not much to be done about this situation, which is awful to hear, because just because you unfortunately live in a place that has higher emissions due to the city that you live in, it does not mean that due to your income or due to your skin color, that means that you should have less access to healthcare than someone that is to look like me, who is a white woman. And I understand that, and I think it's awful, and I think that more needs to be done, because in my research, I found less of what needs to be done for this, and it's awful. Next, when we talk about Chad, it's important to talk about natural disasters and how it's displacing these vulnerable women. Floods and droughts are something that America experiences less than Chad, and having less resources for disaster control contributes to the displacement of families and health problems that come from this change. including the maternal health issues that come with that. Climate change affects Chad more than other countries due to its location and access to less medical resources. Focusing on getting more resources and professionals to help its people to prevent more climate change and to have more access to healthcare is all they can do for Chad. They do less than places like America to increase climate change, those that live in Chad, but take all of the consequences of the rest of the world. And there needs to become a point where this is unfair. My name is Victor Carlo, and this has been my presentation.